The first thing before we talk about the future is really to discuss the past. And last year, I will tell you, was a really productive school year for Brevard Public Schools, from a school culture standpoint and school grades, and also some facility upgrades. And I'll run through some of them, starting first with student achievement. Leading up to last school year, many of you who have lived on the ground in schools, either in leadership, counseling staff, or instruction, know how difficult it's been over the last 3 to 5 years to ramp up for what that new accountability system was going to require of us, that new assessment, et cetera, while being held accountable to the old standards. A pretty tough climb there for 3 to 5 years. Lots of challenges from the state perspective on the assessment. Given all of that, I think we did really well. Out of 67 school districts, we're a B graded school district for our inaugural year. 61% of the possible points were achieved, placing us in a four-way tie for fourth place out of all 67 school districts on the accountability scale. So that was pretty good there. Had a lot of movement with school culture results, and so we've invested in the TNTP Insight Survey, and teachers take that to inform the district on what type of school culture is being created and led by school principals. We've increased the number of teachers who've taken it and the number of teachers who feel that the culture is nurturing and collaborative, et cetera. And then last but not least, we all have something in common here. If you were here back in 2014 as a tax-paying voting citizen, you helped to approve the half-cent sales tax for your investment, the community's investment, into capital resources to provide some essential upgrades to schools, HVAC, security fencing, technology purchases, et cetera, et cetera. And I'm very, very pleased to announce, I didn't introduce our Florida Today reporter, Carolyn. Wave to him. Carolyn, thank you very much she shows up very deliberate about helping us to communicate everything out to the community. So really appreciate you, Carolyn. We'll wait till she leaves to talk about the rest of the stuff, right? So she knows I'm kidding. But the projects are going very, very well, and it's really important that we communicate that out to you, because like most taxpayers, no one really wants to see an increase in taxing for any reason whatsoever. But if and when that does happen, we all expect the entities to be good stewards of those resources. And I'm here to announce, and not just me, but we have an independent community-based organization that serves as a sort of a watchdog over what we do, rightfully so, and all arrows are pointing towards the fact that we are on schedule and on budget with our projects. In fact, this past summer, we just completed and closed out projects at over 25% of the schools here in Brevard. So that's really, really good progress with that effort. Most of you know, and like I said, I see a lot of familiar faces, that last year started out with a draft entry plan, presented it to the board members. They gave me great feedback and input, finalized that entry plan, and then started getting to work. Big part of that work was in getting out to meet people. I'm going to talk about that a little later, but one of the things I like to highlight on this slide is last thing Desmond Blackburn wanted to be accused of or guilty of was trying to change things or fix things that weren't broken. Okay, and so it was really important to me when walking into one of the highest performing school districts in the state and even across the country to thoroughly assess strengths and gaps before even thinking about implementing any kind of change. And so one of the things that, I assessed everything, right? And so one that stopped right at our mission and vision statement, and I've said this, many of you have heard me say before, I've really never read so much in so few words in a mission statement. It's pretty profound when you think about, the goal of serving every student with excellence as a standard. I mean, every is a powerful word. It's not some, It's not most, it's not almost all, but it's each and every kid with excellence. And we all have, there are pockets of excellence, right, that we celebrate. But that tells me that our goal is to do more than just celebrate excellence, but wherever we find it, we need to scale it up and replicate it for every corner of this district. And so some of those challenges I mentioned earlier that impacted or continue to impact employee morale, and it's a never-ending journey there. The fiscal constraints that we have been wrestling with as a district, as an educational community, coming out of a very depressed economy, and not being able to maintain our facilities the way we wanted to maintain them, not being able to compensate or provide health care benefits to our staff like we wanted to, wrestling with those new standards and new tests, and the increase in culturally and economically diverse students. And that translates itself into an increase of students who, through no fault of their own, are walking into our schools not completely prepared to receive the education and the wonderful services that we're providing. Again, their only crime against humanity is being in need, right? But it's something that does present a challenge to the school environment and something that we have to work together to address. I'll highlight here some of the outcomes of what I wanted that entry plan to create, and it was a lot of energy around the community, internal community around staff, and external community around our parents and our partners. And like I mentioned earlier, the process I used was to do my level best and wear out a couple of shoes by going everywhere that would accept me here in the district and just listening from a variety of different perspectives about our strengths and our gaps. And one of the very first things I learned about Brevard, let me back up before I talk about that. Three sort of lenses I use to assess and observe everything within the school system, and that was people, process, and policy. I looked at everything through those three lenses, right? And I found some strengths and some gaps. As far as policies are concerned, I definitely found some gap areas where we need to either strengthen policy or create better policy. I certainly found some process gaps around the system, that is in the execution of that policy. But I will tell you a place that I've been hard pressed to find gaps, and that's within the people here in Brevard. Given the fact that we have policy deficiencies and gaps, given the fact that we have process deficiencies and gaps, and we're such a high-performing school district, right? That points to the quality of the people that work for this district. But one of the things that was a huge kind of red flag that was brought to my attention was the disconnect between all the wonderful people that work for this district. We didn't always talk to and collaborate with everyone that we should talk to and collaborate, which presented a strain not only for the worker, but it presented a strain to people in the schools that will call 5 or 6 different departments, ask the same question and get 5 or 6 different answers. It presented a strain to our community who would sometimes feel that same level of inconsistency. So this slide just tells us that we need to make sure all of the necessary people across the district are communicating and collaborating effectively before we roll out initiatives and products to schools. And we're not perfect today, but it's highlighted as a priority to make sure we reach perfection someday. And then the next big ticket item that we found very early on was that in order for this system to function appropriately, at the very top of the organization, we have to be a highly collaborative, highly effective governance team, and that team being defined by the school board members elected by you, the superintendent that they employ, and then the senior cabinet members. We have to work as a very cohesive team, and we have to lead by example. All of that work turned itself into 6 focus themes I'm going to run through here in a moment. You see them there. I won't read them to you, but they're the 6 themes that we decided to tackle. Back on December 15th, 2015, during the midst of the listening and learning that we were doing, we had a conversation with the community out in Viera where that served as sort of a beta test, and we rolled out some of the initial findings to see whether or not we were on the right path or not. And after that event, several hundred people completed a survey online, and we found that over 90% of the people agreed or strongly agreed that we were on the right path with those 6 themes that I just talked about. Then we did something, I'm going to say, a little different here in Brevard, and we created board champions around those 6 themes. Really important that we do that, going back to the governance team that we're trying to create, and that is having our individual board members leverage their interests, their passions, their skills, their connections to other partnerships around the district, around the state, and help us with the work within those themes, not just waiting until like a workshop or a board meeting to either approve or deny items, but actually getting involved in work groups, committees, getting involved in really the guts of the work. And so you see there, and I think everyone can read that, right? You see which board members are serving as champions to individual themes. And you see here in District 2, Mr. Craig is our champion for facility and capital allocations. We'll be talking about our 10-year capital allocation plan on September 27th in a workshop down at Viera, and I'll talk about that a little bit more later on. So starting with our 6 themes, we have first and foremost, they're not in any order, but if they were going to be in an order, it'd be difficult not to put leading and learning first in a leading and learning institution, right, since we are a school district. But some of the areas we want to focus on, and then what we hope to achieve after we apply deliberate focus in these areas, starting with instructional time. One of the most fundamental things we know about education is that it's really important for teachers, that bell-to-bell instruction is really, really important. Once teachers become qualified and certified and kids are in need, it's really important that we maximize the time that the teacher and student are able to spend in the teaching and learning process. Well, that's become difficult over the years because there are a lot of non-instructional responsibilities and duties that our teachers and school-based staff have. And so primary focus here in this initiative is to examine what all of those time draws are and eliminate them to our very best extent, to the very best extent of our abilities, so that we get increased instructional time for teachers. Not second to that, but equally as important, is making sure we have equitable support systems and discipline plans across the entire district. And I'm going to highlight equitable supports and discipline later on in the presentation. And so we hope to receive out of that deliberate focus, of course, increase student achievement, reduce disciplinary problems, equitable options for our students, and continued increased teacher morale. Around employee excellence, again, things we want to focus on and results that we anticipate receiving after our focus. One of the primary things we're working on here in terms of employee excellence is making sure that every school is manned or womaned by a highly effective principal, okay? A highly effective principal in every building is the starting block to making sure there are highly effective teachers in every classroom and that students are receiving all of their academic and social needs met. And I'll talk about a primary way where we've developed now to make sure that we're able to share in small groups with all of our principals across the district and really learn from each other. Making sure there are, equitable opportunities and growth opportunities for all of our employees, and making sure that we do our best in, diversifying their unique needs in schools. And so some of the things we hope to get out of this focus, of course, an energized learning culture, continue to work and focus on gathering all the resources we have at our disposal to do our very, very best at keeping salary and benefits competitive for our employees and making sure that they are comfortable in their surroundings. Under facilities and capital allocations, I mentioned Mr. Craig. He's our board champion under this. A couple of, so capital dollars, they pay for brick and mortar buildings, computers, buses, technology, et cetera, et cetera. But if I were to highlight one word, or maybe three words on this slide, I would highlight transparency and I would highlight stakeholder confidence, okay? There are a lot of dollars in our capital program. And one, we need to make sure the dollars are spent in an equitable manner. Two, we need to make sure we are very, very transparent in how those dollars are distributed and allocated, so that the community, the taxpayer, continues to have ultimate trust in our system for being good stewards of resources. Governance, I mentioned that earlier, and that just plainly put means that we need to make sure that there is a very collaborative operational support system that schools are feeling by way of the central office. Finance, very similar to the capital allocation area. With finance, I mentioned that we have had many fiscal challenges over the last, 5 to 8 years in education here in Florida. Through those tough times, a lot of budget cuts had to take place for all the right reasons. Some of them may seem hurtful, some of them may seem draconian, some of them we may question. But while I wasn't here in Brevard, I was 200 miles south in another school district wrestling with the same drastic cuts to education. Many of those cuts, if not all of those cuts, kept someone employed or kept a book on some kid's desk. I mean, that's just how bad times were financially. Now that we were climbing out of that recession, there is now an opportunity and really a mandate that we go back and reflect on exactly what those budget cuts were to see whether or not we can revisit them and make sure our resources are aligned to our current priorities. Really important for us. In addition to that, this isn't 09 or 2010 or one of those really, really bad budget years, but I will tell you, we just had a very involved conversation with our newly hired lobbying team, a company who's very, very connected to our state lawmakers. And while they don't predict that those horrible, horrendous years are coming back in near future, we're not on easy street either. Okay, so we're probably going to be flat, if not receiving some additional budget cuts here in the next 2 to 3 years. And so one of the things we have to be very deliberate about doing is, in addition to analyzing our former budget cuts, that is being very, very deliberate about finding cost savings opportunities here in the district. Okay, and I know, and I hear this all the time. We've already been through so many years where we've cut, and we're resource deficient right now. I don't think we can cut anymore. And that's not really the point to this exercise, right? It is asking ourselves as an organization whether or not we are spending not most of our dollars efficiently, not almost all of our dollars efficiently, but each and every dollar being spent efficiently with zero waste or inefficiency, right? That's a tall order. And we're good. We're really, really good at spending our finances. But I will tell you, I'm going to continue to push the organization, because being really, really good isn't close to being good enough. And I'll tell you why. We recently approved a $900 million budget for our system. If we're really, really good, if we are effectively, efficiently spending, let's say, 98% of our resources, right? That may sound really, really good until you do the math on what 2% of $900 million comes out to. And so even if we're 98% efficient, 2% inefficiency, right, is a really big number. That number is either more jobs, higher wages, better benefits, more resources in classrooms, just a 2% increase in efficiency. And so we're working to create that. And so some of the expected results there: decrease the negative impact of previous budget cuts, increase the T word again, transparency, right? The community, the taxpayer, they have to know for certain that we are being good stewards of their resources. And government and community relations, right? Here, we're just really trying to be the best neighbor in Brevard to the business community, faith-based, parents, municipal, county government, all the entities here in Brevard that we possibly can be. Ensuring that there is a consistent way that we respond to constituent concerns and that we are leveraging all communicative devices to make sure we're proactive in giving you information. And so all of what I just talked about at a very, very high level has translated into some organizational work that goes on behind the scenes. Hopefully, unless you join one of our work groups, you really won't have to be involved in, hopefully, the recipient of our more organized work, but just to kind of highlight what goes on. After we had those board champions and we finalized those focus themes, we started working on turning every one of those focus themes into about 20 objective profiles, where there was an individualized vision, mission statement, specific goals and strategies and timelines towards getting things done. And now we have project plans that have objectives, strategies, activities that further fine-tunes who does what when in order to execute on those strategies within the given time frame. And then we are completely rearranging our daily, weekly, monthly routines as a governance team, as a senior cabinet, and many of the additional senior leaders in this room to make sure that the strategic plan doesn't sit on the shelf, but that it becomes a part of who we are every day, and we are constantly pushing each other and checking our work against our goals. We do this in one-on-one situations, but we're also going to leverage very similar to what our principals are doing now in small groups and providing peer critique. The senior cabinet will get together and we'll highlight one department or one division or several divisions at one time, and we'll really dive into whether or not we are on schedule, under budget, we're working towards completing our strategies on time. And if there are any barriers, and then we can, fix them at that point. I think we're coming up on our first stock take here, Dr. Mullins, in 2 weeks. I'll spend a little additional time on this slide because it represents probably one of the more significant changes for this year, and that is the elimination of the curriculum division, elimination of the 3 area offices, and the creation of the elementary office of leading and learning and secondary office of leading and learning, and how principals and curriculum staff are now organized in the work that they are focusing on. And so you see their centralized academic focus. And so the key word there is being focus, right? At the elementary, well, I'll start with K to 12. All schools for all kids, the foundation is meeting the social and emotional needs. I'm going to highlight that next slide, and our discipline plan. But after that, the academic focus, we're trying to perfect processes around early learning, or early grades literacy. We're trying to perfect processes around middle grades algebra. That's kids taking algebra and successfully completing it before they leave middle school. And then we're trying to perfect our processes around making sure kids graduate and college career readiness. And I normally tell a joke there that college career readiness is really about getting all of your kids out of your house and never to return. That's kind of the benchmark there. And people normally laugh, but don't worry about it. But those are the areas of focus at all three of our grade levels. Now, this piece, right? This graphic really reminds us that before we can talk about ELA standards, before we can talk about math or science standards or what do you guys call them in elementary school? Scales and goals. And before we can do that, we have to acknowledge the fact that in all cultural, economic, social backgrounds, not all students walk into our schools without some kind of social or emotional challenge that we need to acknowledge and wrestle with before we consider what the standard of the day is that needs to be taught, right? We need to be deliberate about that because there are factors that influence student readiness to learn. We just got to be honest about it and work deliberately towards it. Second to that is the fact, bona fide fact, that every now and again a kid is going to say or do something totally wrong. All right, and when that happens, I'm an absolute fan of firm, fair, consistent discipline, but in that last statement, consistent is the key word. And across this system right now, we are not administering discipline to our students in a consistent manner. And that is a major problem. And so Dr. Theddy and her team are working this year with probably many of you in here to make sure we can walk into school year 17-18, with a very deliberate menu of options on how to address social emotional needs and a discipline plan across the system that ensures that the same kind of inappropriate behavior down in Palm Bay would be treated just like the same inappropriate behavior up in Titusville, okay, and all around the district. Those of you who have made friends with me on Facebook or Twitter or LinkedIn, you know that I very routinely use this hashtag People Process Performance, and I'll tell you what it means to me. And why there's one word now capitalized. Starting at the end of the phrase, in education, we have become one of our mistakes, I might add, overly concerned with student performance, to the exclusion or reduction of considering what the best practices or processes are, and almost to the complete exclusion of what it means to have quality relationships among people, big people and little people. And so that's my hashtag, my commitment to flip the order of things, and that is to maximize relationships among people, big and little, use those relationships, leverage those relationships in order to create best practice or best process that we can all commit to, and then watching performance just reach an all-time high, okay? But never, ever, ever abandoning our commitment to our relationships. That's really the glue that's going to keep us all together and get us to work on those best processes. So last year, year one for me with you, it was all about people. It was all about me getting to know you and allowing you to get to know me, right? This year, year two goal is to continue to leverage those relationships, but really focus in on using the relationships to create the processes around those 6 themes that we talked about, okay? And then by next year, we're gonna sit back and just watch performance just come on in, because we'll have our relationships as the foundation, our best processes, and we will be performing. So, many of you have already been involved in some way, shape, or form. If you want additional involvement, send us an email at spinvolvement@brevardschools.org if you want to get intimately involved in working on the strategic plan and helping us to figure out what those processes are. Just send us an email, let us know which one of the focus themes you want to work on, and you're in. Okay, now, if you want to perhaps help us out once or twice a month or a quarter or something like that, you have that kind of time to give, then great. If you want to work with us day in and day out, that's great too. So we have something for everyone. Focus groups, surveys, committee work, we have some kind of work for everyone if you want to stay involved and engaged with us. I'm going to come back to this slide and probably leave that up, but if there are additional questions, there is a summary of the strategic plan on our website, brevardschools.org. There is a flip book where a lot more details than I went over here tonight, and there's a video coming soon to the website as well on the strategic plan to give you more details. But I'm going to go back to this slide and just leave that up just in case you want to send us an email. And that's my story. I'm sticking to it. That's our strategic plan. I appreciate you guys coming out tonight.